Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends, and welcome to this March 22nd, 2013 edition of Nightcast. Tonight, the head of China's Weather Bureau has warned that the country faces serious problems as a result of climate change. Now, this is very unusual for a Chinese official to be so open on the subject. Michael Bristow reports.
Coal provides the energy that's propelled the Chinese economy's remarkable growth, but it comes at a cost. China emits more greenhouse gases than any other country, causing global warming and climate change. The head of China's Weather Bureau, Zheng Guoguan, has now revealed what that means. He said there are now more extreme weather events, more storms and more floods have hit the country. And temperatures in China have risen twice as fast as the world average. That means more droughts. The operation of massive engineering projects like the Three Gorges Dam and the Tibet Railway could be affected. Mr. Zheng said the country will have to adjust to falling crop yields and the unpredictable flow of its great rivers. The need for action was echoed by the Vice Premier at a conference on Sunday.
China, in our new norm, should always put the environment and our ecological system at the top of our agenda. No carbon development. Green development and sustainable development is the path we should take.
China is developing alternative sources of energy, but perhaps not enough and not fast enough to avert the bleak future climate change may bring. Michael Bristow, BBC News.
And friends, I pulled from the archive a special video report by the BBC that just goes back to the beginning of the month, March 5, that shows some facts related to climate change, because I know many of us we've heard this subject covered in so many ways, some pro and some con, that some don't believe there's any significance to global warming or climate change subjects at all. And the real truth of it is found in Leviticus 26, verse 4. I've often read both chapters, Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, the two chapters that are often referred to as the blessing and cursings chapters, where God starts out in the first half of each of those two chapters, Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 28, saying that if you diligently hearken to the voice of your Creator, if you walk in His statutes, keep His commandments, His statutes, His judgments, then He enumerates blessing after blessing. He says the second half of the chapter on, if you don't, cursing, and increased cursings, 7 times the more if you continue to disobey, and then finally the breaking of the pride of your power. And then we jump over to prophecies such as Ezekiel's prophecy in chapter 6, verse 6, where God says, okay, you want to hang in your disobedience to me, then all of your cities shall be laid waste. And He's speaking to the people of promise, the 12 tribes of Israel primarily. He says, all of your cities will be laid waste. A prophecy for these latter days and times since 1955, the first time when all of a big country like the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, where all, and Russia, I meant to say Reuben, France, where all of your cities could be laid waste. It couldn't have happened before 1955, before the invention of hydrogen-type nuclear bombs, big super-powered nuclear-powered bombs. And on the other hand, we obey. God says in verse 4 of Leviticus 26, I'll give you one of the specific things He mentions relates to this subject of climate change or global warming, where God says, I will give you rain in due season. And taken in context with the other things God says, that basically means I'll give you the proper amount of rain. Not too much so that you have flooding, not too little so that you have drought. But here we have an archive video from March 5. Well done by the BBC. Some have criticized the BBC, but I'm thankful we have a license where we can play their videos, and it has some of the most outstanding coverage of any news reporting organization in the whole world. Having been the former United Kingdom, the former empire that the sun used to never set on, they still have inroads into countries where it's difficult for others to go. And they've just got an outstanding reporting organization. This report says the number of people affected by river flooding around the world, in saying that the BBC has an outstanding news reporting organization, some of the credit for our licensing here goes to God, who opened up a door for us, brethren, to be able to, when Robert Collins wanted to honor a request by a local Alabama brother named Ray Green. I don't believe Ray will mind our mentioning his name here. I know him pretty well. And it's a compliment to Ray that he came over and criticized a longtime 50-year minister who had just gotten out of the hospital with cancer. Now, Ray, in a way, I'm giving you a backhanded compliment in part, because he criticized a minister, 50-year minister, who had just gotten out of hospital with cancer. And the doctor told him he only had 3 weeks more to live. You know, the doctor had been counting it down from 6 months. Now you got 3 weeks left to live. Letting you go home if you got a 24/7 caregiver, which wound up being myself. And you can go home, but and let him do anything he wants to do, Mr. Caregiver, because he's only got these weeks left to live. Let him watch funny movies that'll help him, actually, and anything he wants. He wanted to see Bonanza and Western movies, so we got a whole bunch of those. And Ray comes over and mentions some events in world news, and we'd been watching Bonanza movies and Westerns. And so we had no clue, no idea what was going on that day or the day before in the news. Now, we might have been watching some news once in a while, but we just weren't current at the moment. Ray let us have it. He chewed us out, especially Mr. Collins. For him, a long-time 50-year minister in the local area, you should be watching world news. Christ told us, watch these things that relate to the prophecies. Well, Ray goes home, Mr. Collins and I talk and say, Mr. Collins said, Ray's right. We should be watching and praying about things that happen in the world news and watching those things that relate to the seals of Revelation. So we said, okay, let's start doing that. So we started doing that. We got rid of a lot of the Bonanza movies and stuff. And then we had a live stream we had been doing on the weekends, and even from the hospital when Mr. Collins was in the hospital. And we did it from bedside, his bedroom, his bed in the hospital. We got their permission. We got access to a high-speed internet inside the hospital. They gave us the passwords for it, and we transmitted live stream right from the hospital. Some of you told me you saw those live streams from the hospital. That's why some of you are following us now, because of having seen Mr. Collins do those then. So we said, hey, we could use this live stream channel we set up and put this news that you and I, the two of us, were spending all day digging out the pertinent news, and we said, well, if we get a license to show videos of world news, and we made application in several places, found out, hey, wow, BBC, you got your license. And so we started that show program, this nightly program. How long ago is that now? That's back in 2010 or 11, I forget. Mr. Collins did a year's worth of shows, nearly a year's worth of show, and shortly before he died, he said, Steve, keep this going. I said, fine. I was working behind the camera. I thought, yeah, okay, I'll find somebody else to host, replace Mr. Collins as host, and I'll keep running things behind the camera. He said, be sure you keep it going. So after 6 months after he died, I couldn't find anybody who was willing to take the chair here and do the programs, and in prayer the thought came, you need to take it on an interim basis until I provide somebody else. I said, fine. Well, see, how many tonight is program number 570 that I've done on an interim basis, my dear friends. And I don't see anybody else coming forward to do it. I've frankly gotten comfortable in the chair now, running things that have to be done from the back side and the front side of the camera. One horse. I would love to have some help here. I certainly would. But let's get on with this news story. We were trying to fulfill Luke 21:36, to watch these things that relate to the first four seals of Revelation 6 that Jesus Christ said, watch and be praying over. And then he said in that same verse, verse 36 of Luke 21, he said, watch and pray. And he goes next to a promise that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things to come. Now that could only apply to a time between the fourth and fifth seal, because the time when God talks about escaping is escaping the events of the fifth seal, the Great Tribulation, where he holds out a candle, a carrot or a stick to a carrot stick. It's kind of how the phrase goes. He holds you out a carrot of a promise to be accounted worthy to escape to a place in the wilderness that he's prepared that triangulates just east of the waterway in the Middle East of Israel that runs between the Lake Tiberias and the Dead Sea. Just east of that, the land of the children of Ammon, the land of the Moabites, the land of the Edomites. That's a triangulation that's just east of the big waterway between the Dead Sea and Lake Tiberias, running from south to north. And Petra's in that area, and that certainly fits some of the descriptions in Revelation that talk about the enemy, the archenemy, Satan, the devil, chasing after the woman, and the earth opening up a flood to help the woman and protect her. And just the way you get into Petra and all just sounds just like that verse, but Petra's only a small area of that triangulation that is protected from the beast power during the Great Tribulation. Now, I've given you those details before, a little slower, but I'm just hitting the highlights of it for right now, friends, that Christ was saying in Luke 21:36, watch these first four events, first four seals, so you can escape the fifth seal, which is the fifth seal is the next major event to happen in prophecy. It is, as Jesus Christ described it in plain language in Matthew 24, it's the time of a great tribulation, which he described as a time of trouble greater than anything since the beginning of the world, known or ever shall be. So it's worst time in the history of man, period, that's coming. And if we pull out a little bit here to show you the slides behind me, we can zoom in on one of these slides, the one that shows the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. I think I did this over the weekend on the channel I'm on the weekend. That is actually the crown of the Holy Roman Empire. You're seeing right in the middle of this slide. Big gawky thing. I've seen it in person in the Royal Treasury in Vienna, where it's kept and protected for the coming seventh head to be crowned in a coronation ceremony, most likely in Frankfurt, Germany, where the Emperor's Hall is, Kaiser's Hall, which just simply the German expression for Emperor's Hall, and it's the place where the Pope has gone and crowned many of the heads of the Roman Empire and the Holy Roman Empire. When the Pope does it, it's a concordant from the Pope. It's a holy concordant, and the last one that happened to was the sixth head, Mr. Mussolini, and we've got him pictured on the slides right here. He reigned from 1936 until April 28, 1945, when he was strung upside down after being killed. He and his mistress and his comrades, they were all killed, and then hung upside down from a canopy of an Esso gasoline station in Italy. And of course, being the sixth head, he followed. Let's go back up here and just show you the first 6 heads. Revelation 17 verse 10 talks about there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, one is. That one is between 1936 and 1945. I just mentioned him, Mussolini. You see him in the bottom far right corner. We had him close up just a moment ago. That's him right there. And the 5 before him ended with Napoleon, who you see right next to him there. There's Napoleon. He reigned 9.5 or 10 years from 1804 until late 1804 until 1814, 1815. And then before him was Charles V. Charles V. He was the 4th king of those 5 kings that are fallen. And then just before him there was Otto the Great. And before him was Charlemagne, crowned by the Pope. And before him, the first of those 7 kings that are mentioned in Revelation 17:10, Justinian, who restored the imperial empire and had a reign. And from him, the Holy Roman Empire ran continually from 554 until 1814 A.D. So it would either, if 1815 is the correct date that some are saying, I got to check that. I think they may have that wrong. Then it would have run from 555 to what did I just say, 1815 A.D., because it's a period of 1,260 years prophetically, and God's got that right, and He don't mess up. He doesn't mess up on that. And so, all right, there's just a little highlighting of some of the criteria we use for bringing you the news stories in this program. Now, I wanted to mention Leviticus 26 and especially verse 4, where God says, "If you obey me as a nation, as especially the 12 tribes of Israel, where those tribes are scattered around the world, as mentioned here in this slide, if you obey me, especially you 12 tribes, I will give you rain in due season." And if you don't, the corollary of that, friends, is what you're going to wind up with is climate change, global warming, things that produce not rain in due season, but drought in some places and a lot of flooding in others. Now, this story I'm going to from our archive, from simply back to March 5. Today's March 22nd, so we're going back a little more than 2 weeks. The number of people affected by river flooding around the world is said to be able to almost triple over the next 15 years in this story because of climate change and population growth, says this BBC news story. And they're getting this according to new analysis from the World Resources Institute in the UK. In the UK alone, almost 76,000 people a year could be at risk of flooding if defenses are not improved. But the real factor goes right back. Friends, I'm telling you, the bottom line of it, the foundation of all knowledge, is God's Word, the Holy Bible, which says, Leviticus 26, "You obey me, I'll give you rain in due season. I'll protect you from all this crazy flooding type things." But men who don't understand that, they look at physical things and they think, well, we need more defenses. But there are a lot of facts in this story I'm going to play now with Claire Marshall reporting that will give you a good understanding of what we can anticipate.
Each year around the world, hundreds of thousands of lives are devastated by flooded rivers. New research predicts that this will get worse, and it will happen quickly. This is the first public analysis of all world data on current and future risk. According to the World Resources Institute, 21 million people are at risk, and the problem already costs almost £65 billion a year. In just 15 years, there could be 54 million people at risk, and the annual potential cost around £340 billion. The calculator is unique in bringing together different kinds of information, how people, economies and specific areas may be affected.
What this tool has allowed people to do is identify the countries most at risk. And the top few are India, Bangladesh, China, Vietnam, Afghanistan, countries that really don't have the resources right now to deal with these issues. And so there is a role for international cooperation as well. It isn't just a national problem, it's a global problem.
Here in the UK, the report claims that by 2030, if investment in flood prevention remains at current levels, the country could be facing an annual bill of more than £2 billion. It's rare that lives are lost in river flooding in this country, but here in Bradford-on-Avon, the floods of 2013 caused chaos. Water levels reached way above my head. Businesses and homes were devastated. These kinds of scenes look likely to become more frequent. The World Bank says that this calculator will help to inform governments about mitigation and defence strategies. Claire Marshall, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Claire Marshall. Friends, the United Nations Security Council has responded to a call by Yemen President Hadi for urgent intervention, and they held an emergency meeting today. Security in the country has deteriorated over the last few days, and on Friday, Islamic State said it organized suicide bombings that killed 137 people. Sources in Yemen say the United States is pulling all of its remaining special forces out of the country. Peter Dobby reports.
Noisy protests on the streets of Yemen. Thousands of people angry at the appalling violence in Sana'a on Friday. 137 people were killed when suicide bombers attacked two mosques when they knew they would be at their most crowded. Both mosques were used by supporters of the Shia rebels, the Houthis.
We took to the streets to reject violence, the sectarian and armed groups that targeted mosques and blew up worshippers. We reject the attacking of mosques.
Everyone who enters the mosque should be safe, be a Shiite, a Sunni or a Shafite, and we disavow those who bombed the mosques.
On Saturday, the president demanded that the Shia rebel militia withdraw from Sana'a. In a televised address, he urged all parties to attend peace talks.
I am calling on all interested parties to recognise the dangerous situation that we are facing and to move away from the narrow political view and to participate in the dialogue that we have called for to avoid any division and violence and to rectify the political process.
At the other end of the country, the port city of Aden, Mr. Hadi's bolt hole and now his power base. There were more protests here too this week. This is a chaotic fight for territory, power and superiority, broadly splitting the country in two, a violent north-south divide. Peter Dobby, BBC News.
Friends, on our next report, Houthi rebels are in control of the strategically important city in southern Yemen, according to officials. The takeover sparked protest among local people at a time of escalating violence by rival armed groups, including Islamic State. Emily Buchanan reports.
The shadow of war looms over Yemen. This is Taiz, where protesters vented their fury as Houthi rebels took over the city. The rebels, wearing security forces uniform, fired tear gas to try and disperse the crowds. This man said the people of Taiz totally rejected the presence of these militia, who came dressed as army soldiers. In February, the Houthi rebels seized the capital, Sana'a, surrounding the presidential palace. They also have the backing of the former president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, and military units loyal to him. But now their target looks to be President Hadi, now calling in vain for peace from his stronghold in the southern port of Aden.
I'm calling on all interested parties to recognise the dangerous situation we are facing and to move away from the narrow political view. I call on everyone to participate in dialogue to avoid any division and violence.
The Houthis are Shia. They've been advancing into Sunni areas. Many fear this battle will become a proxy war for big regional powers like Iran and Saudi Arabia.
Yemen is like a battlefield for many countries who are fighting against each other and using Yemen as a battlefield to actually do the fighting in. And a lot of influence from outside is really happening.
Capitalising on the chaos, Al-Qaeda militants and affiliates of the so-called Islamic State. This is the aftermath of suicide bomb attacks on 2 Shia mosques in Sana'a during last Friday prayers. A disturbing vision of the violence ahead if the country does descend into civil war. Emily Buchanan, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Emily Buchanan. Friends, footage released by the Tunisian Interior Ministry shows 2 gunmen inside the Bardo Museum during the attack that killed 25 people. Islamic State has said it was behind the attack on the museum, which is next to the country's parliament. The 2 gunmen who were killed have been identified, as you'll see in this video report. And actually, I'm going to keep that forward. We just have video with no commentary on it. I'll give it a whack, see if I can tell you their names. The 2 men are identified as Yassine Labidi and Hatem Kachnui. All right, that's my best shot at the way those are spelled. And friends, next story, let's go to something that relates to how the EU, United Europe, may be shaping around as either the EU or eventually a United States of Europe, fully federated. There's another country that is upset about austerity. Scuffles. See, do we have that ready to go? Yes, I did change that. Okay. Scuffles have broken out in Spain at the end of a major rally where they're demanding an end to austerity. Thousands of Spaniards protested in the Madrid city calling for jobs and affordable housing. There were a number of arrests after a small group of protesters broke away, attacking a bank and vandalizing property. Janie Mitchell reports.
Bread, jobs, affordable housing and dignity. Those were the demands brought by Spaniards from across the country to the heart of the Spanish capital.
I've come from Toledo. We have to come to Madrid because we can't stay at home, letting them take away our healthcare, our education and destroying the country.
We're people without dreams, without hope, without dignity above all. That's what we need to fight for, our dignity.
It's shameful what's happening. This is not shown on TV, the queues of hungry people.
The demonstration came on the eve of the first real test of Spain's upstart radical left-wing party Podemos. An election in Andalusia, one of the country's poorest regions, with unemployment running at more than 30%, well above the national average.
Spain has always had a very high unemployment rate, so part of it is structural, but of course a lot of it has to do with the economic crisis, and it has not gone down from 25% for a long, long time, in spite of all the policies and all the attempts to reduce these unemployment rates.
The outcome of the Andalusia poll will provide clues as to how far Podemos, led by the ponytailed Pablo Iglesias, may fare in the general election later this year. The party has led some opinion polls. The name Podemos translates as "we can," and it's hoping to emulate the success of its Greek anti-austerity counterpart Syriza. But in Madrid, as the night wore on, there were a number of arrests as a small group of protesters attacked a bank and vandalised property. How far the Spanish government meets the needs of its disaffected electorate over the next few months is likely to determine the shape of its successor. Janie Mitchell, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Janie. Friends, following on the heels of that, I don't have video, but we've got some photographs that show how one man was punched in the face during an attack at the Stamford Hill synagogue. 6 people have been arrested after a group forced its way into this synagogue in what police have described as an anti-Semitic incident. Police said the drunk men had just left a nearby party and tried to get into the synagogue in Stamford Hill, North London. They tried to get in during the early hours this morning. One man was punched in the face as he tried to stop them. The 6 were held for public order offenses and assault. Police said one man had made an anti-Semitic comment. And then we have another photograph with this story, friends. The caption on this photograph reads, Rabbi Maurice Davis said the attack was, quote, more anti-social than anti-Semitic. So the rabbi doesn't agree with the police. A Metropolitan Police spokesman said a number of people entered the synagogue on Graven Park Road, but they were removed shortly afterwards by security staff. The incident is being treated, again, by the police, it's being treated as an anti-Semitic incident due to the remarks made by one of the group, said the Met spokesman. At this early stage, quote, there is no suggestion that there was a far-right or extremist attack, but rather the completely unacceptable actions of a drunken group. 4 men and 2 women were arrested at the scene, but police are looking for anyone else in the incident. Rabbi Maurice Davis of the Ahavas Torah Synagogue told the BBC, quote, I think this incident was more anti-social than anti-Semitic. I mentioned that to you. That's a caption with the photograph, so we're repeating that because that's part of this story also. The rabbi said that Stamford Hill was a safe place to live for Jews, and there was a good social cohesion in the borough there. Inspector Jonathan Waterfield said, quote, we are investigating to establish the full circumstances of the incident and to identify anyone else involved in the disturbance who has not yet been arrested. We've also increased police patrols in the Stamford Hill area to provide reassurance to the community. The man who was punched was treated at the scene, but did not require hospital treatment. And then, friends, in our next story, the United States urges vigilance after IS online threat to military. The Pentagon said the threat was unverified and would be investigated. That's the caption with this opening photograph. The U.S. military has called for, quote, vigilance after an online threat was allegedly made by Islamic State, IS, to about 100 of its personnel. A list of names and addresses was posted on a website linked to the group alongside a call for them to be killed. The Pentagon said the threat was unverified and would be investigated. The IS-linked group said it obtained the information by hacking servers and databases, but U.S. officials said most of the data was in the public domain. A U.S. security source told the BBC that those on the list were being contacted. The group, which called itself the Islamic State Hacking Division, said the personnel named had participated in U.S. missions against IS. It urged its supporters in the U.S. to, quote, take the final step and deal with those named. A U.S. defense official told U.S. media, I can't confirm the validity of the information, but we are looking into it. And the caption with this photograph that's part of this story, friends, reads, a U.S.-led coalition is training local forces in Iraq. U.S. Marine Corps spokesman Lieutenant Colonel John Caldwell said, vigilance and force protection considerations remain a priority for commanders and their personnel. He recommended that mariners check their online social footprint, ensuring privacy settings are adjusted to limit the amount of available personnel or personal information. The U.S. and its allies have been conducting airstrikes against Islamic State militants in Syria and Iraq since last September. IS has seized large swaths of territory in both countries. Its brutal tactics, including mass killings and abductions of members of religious and ethnic minorities, have sparked outrage across the world. Tomorrow night, friends, we'll try to cover a story related to where the key countries stand on the IS. That's it for tonight's report this Sunday night. Friends, God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back tomorrow night, Monday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, this is your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying good night and so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.